Good evening, everyone. So today we'll be starting with we'll continue with CRS 2024 past question. And we'll be starting with the first question. We'll proceed with the first question. And what's the first question there? The first question there is the Old Testament documentary hypothesis written during the time of Solomon is dash. What's the Old Testament documentary hypothesis? The question, the options here are option A, Elohist, option B, Deuteronomist, option C, Yahwist, and option D, priestly. Now, these four answers there includes the four documentary hypotheses of the Pentateuch. So we have to differentiate which one was written during the time of Moses. For the Deuteronomy source, this one was written during the time of Josiah because it was founded by Prophet Hilkiah during the time of Josiah. So let's look at the Yahweh source. The Yahweh source, if you can see in the arrangement of the documentary hypothesis, the Yahweh source is one that started it. For example, the JEDP, which is the four documentary hypothesis. The JJ stands for the Jehovah or Yahweh source. Therefore, the Yahweh source is considered the oldest of the four main sources of the Old Testament. And also, the documentary hypothesis also suggests that the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament, is a compilation of these sources written by different authors over time, rather than being solely authored by Moses. Now, the Yahweh source has traditionally been believed to have been written during the time of Solomon. So the correct answer there is the Yahweh source. Now, let's move on to question 2. For question 2, the question there is, before God called Abraham, what was the latter's religious view? The options there are option A, atheistic, option B, skeptic, option C, monotheistic, and option D, polytheistic. Yeah. Now let's explain what this atheistic, skeptic, monotheistic, polytheistic is before we get our answer. For the atheistic, which is the first option here, what is the atheistic? The atheistic is the lack of belief. For example, the atheistic has to do with people that don't have a religion, that people that don't believe that God exists, or they do not believe in any gods or deity. Now, for the skeptic has to do with people that have doubt about their own religion. And for the monotheistic, this one has to do with people that believe in a single deity. And for the polytheistic, this one has to do with multiple gods. Like they believe in different gods, they believe in multiple gods. Now, if you are looking at Abraham, his later belief, or his first view about religion was that he believed in a polytheistic system whereby he believed in multiple gods or deity. And based on biblical and historical evidence, Abraham, also known as Abraham, held a polytheistic belief before God called him. And the clearest biblical support comes from the book of Joshua 24 verse 2, where it said that this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, said. Long ago, your ancestors, including Terah, which was the father of Abraham, and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods. If you look there, it said other gods. That means it has Abraham's belief was multiple gods. Now let's move on to, so the correct answer there is polytheistic. Yeah. Let's move on to question 3. For question 3, it has as a question, genre means a type of arts, literature, or music characterized by specific dash. Now the options there are option A, form, content, and style. Option B, arrangement, location, and drama. Option C, plan, position, and culture. And option D, agreement, points, and system. Now let's first understand all this. If you look at, like, excluding the biblical genres, if you want to answer this question, we have to answer it based on biblical genres. But let's look at it in the literature and the literature genre aspects. For literature genre aspect, you see that it's characterized by form, content, and style. Form in the sense that it has to do with structure and organization in which the Bible is arranged. And for the style, it has to do with the language or tone in which a text or a Bible, if you're looking at biblical genre, is arranged. And for the content, this one has to do with the moral lesson in which the story is talking about. But for the biblical genre, the content has to do with the moral lesson that the Bible explores. So the correct answer there has to be form, content, and style, because it has to do with the structure in which the Bible is arranged, the style, that is the language in which the Bible is arranged, and the moral lesson, which is the content in which the Bible is arranged. Now let's move on to question 4. What's question 4? It says, what was Amos' occupation before he became a prophet? Now, this is a direct question that requires a direct answer. For that, we have to look at the options. It says option A, hunter, option B, shepherd, option C, watchman, and option D, priest. Now, if you take a look at Amos 7, verse 14, it says there, Amos referred himself as he was neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet, but he was a shepherd. And he also took care of the sycamore fig trees. This means that Amos was a working class layman, not part of the formal religious or prophetic establishment. That means before he became a prophet, he was a shepherd and also a dresser of a sycamore tree. So, as we don't have a dresser of a sycamore tree among the options there, the correct answer there has to be a shepherd, which is option A, the shepherd. Now let's move on to question 5. Question 5 says, God commissioned Moses on Mount Dash. Where did God call Moses? We are looking at the aspect of where God called Moses to go and free the Israelites from the hands of Egypt. Now, looking at the story, you see that God called Moses through a burning bush. Now, where did this burning bush happen? If you look at, hold on a bit. If you look at Exodus 3, verse 1 to 2, there God commissioned Moses on Mount Horeb, where he encountered him, where God casted a burning bush in the way of Moses, where he was shepherding the flocks of his father-in-law. So God called him there to free, in the form of a burning bush, to go and free the Israelites out of the hands of the Egyptians. So the correct answer there is Horeb instead of Carmel. Carmel, that Mount Carmel, is linked to Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Why Horeb has to do with Moses. Now let's move on to question 5. Question 6, sorry. Question 6, the question there is, the kingdom of Israel was divided under King Dash. The kingdom of Israel was divided under which king? Now let's look at the options. We have option A, Solomon, option B, Saul, option C, Rehoboam, and option D, David. Now these options here are the kings of Judah precisely. Now we are looking at the division of kingdom that was divided into Judah and Israel. Now let's see. Solomon was a king, quite all right. Saul was a king, Rehoboam was a king, David was a king. Now, among these 4 kings, which of them was the kingdom divided in their time or during their reign? If you look at Solomon, God made a statement to Solomon that the kingdom would be divided and given to his servant, which was Jeroboam. And this prophecy was made to Ahijah, prophet Ahijah. So in the fulfillment of the prophecy, it was noted that during the time of Rehoboam, that means when Rehoboam became king, the people requested for something, which is for Rehoboam to lighten the burden placed upon them by his father Solomon. But instead of Rehoboam to lighten the burden of the burden that his father placed upon the people, he rather increased the burden. And this made the northern tribes to revolt and rebelled against him, therefore forming their own kingdom of Israel and making Jeroboam the king and fulfilling the prophecy given by God to prophet Ahijah in the book of First King. If you read through First King, you'll see the story there. So now the option there has Rehoboam. So Rehoboam, therefore, is the correct answer. Now let's move on to question 7 quickly. For question 7, it says, the following were killings committed by Herod the Great, except the murder of Dash. Now, before reading through the options, we have 7 different Herods in the Bible who all committed different atrocities. We have Herod the Great, number 1, who ruled Judea from 37 to 4 BCE. Then we have Herod Archelaus, son of Herod the Great. Then thirdly, I've mentioned 2 Herods now, if you're counting it. Thirdly, we have Herod Antipas, son of Herod the Great also, but he ruled Galilee and Perea instead of ruling Judea. And fourthly, we have Herod Philip the Tetrarch, then Herod Agrippa the first and Herod Agrippa the second, removing Herod the Great. Now these Herods all have what they did. Now let's look at the option. The option there has option A as A, Marian, his wife. Option B, John the Baptist. Option C, many children in Bethlehem. And option D, his biological children. Now, if you read through the Bible, you see that Herod the Great killed Marianne, his wife. He killed the many children in Bethlehem during the time when Jesus was born. And he also killed his biological children. But Herod Antipas was the one that killed John the Baptist. So the question says, what the following were killings committed by Herod the Great, except the murder of. So the correct answer there is John the Baptist, because it was Herod Antipas that killed John the Baptist instead of Herod the Great. So now let's move on to question 8. Question 8 says, which of these is the appropriate definition for the term proto-Luke? Proto-Luke. Now, we must first understand what proto means before moving on to the option. What do you understand by proto? From the word proto, you can see that it's a Greek word that means first or earliest or the beginning. Therefore, if you combine it with the book of Luke, it means proto-Luke. Now, what is the appropriate definition of the term proto-Luke? Let's look at the options here. For option A, it says it is the theme of Luke's gospel. Option B, it is a term in favor of Greaseback hypothesis. Option C, it is a type of memorabilia. And option D, it's an earlier form of Luke's gospel. Now, option D has earlier there. From the definition I said, proto means first or earliest. So if you look at the third option there, it has earlier. It is an earlier form of Luke's gospel. So that one is the correct answer. Now let's move on to question 9. For question 9, it says, one of the following was not the reason why the writing of the gospels was delayed. We have various options there. We have to pick the correct answer. For the option, we have because of writing materials as option A, the apostles were still alive as eyewitness for option B, option C, the Pax Romana, and option D, the parochial factor. Now, there is one odd answer there. The odd answer there is the Pax Romana. If you look at the other options, like because of writing materials, the apostles were still alive as eyewitnesses, and the parochial factor, these were the following reasons why the gospel was not written before. The eyewitness, the eyewitness were still alive, which were the apostles. They were still alive. That means they can give a detailed explanation on everything that Jesus did, the sayings of Jesus, the miracles of Jesus, things that happened in the past. That is why the gospel was not written. But after the death of these apostles, the gospel was written because there was no eyewitness there. So the Pax Romana was not the Pax Romana. The Pax Romana refers to the spread of Christianity during the period of the Roman Empire. So therefore, the Pax Romana, instead of hindering or obstructing the spread of or delaying the writing of the gospel, it further spread the gospel or Christianity during the time of the Roman Empire down to this day. Now, let's move on to question 10. We've answered question 9 as the Pax Romana. Let's move on to question 10. What's the question? The question there is, which New Testament scholar developed the idea of the Messianic secret? There are different options there. There are different scholars with different names on the option. Option A, we have F.F. Bruce. Option B, we have William Rede. And option C, we have James Consolman. And option D, we have B.H. Streeter. So now, which of these scholars is related to the Messianic secrets? We can only pick one who is associated with the Messianic secrets. And this scholar is called William Rede. Now, why is it William Rede? William Rede is associated with the Messianic secrets because he developed the German biblical message, or I cannot pronounce that German word, but he wrote a German word, which means the Messianic secrets in 1901, where he argued that the Gospel of Mark presents Jesus as commanding secrecy about his Messianic identity. Okay, now we've gotten the answer of question 10, which is William Rede. Now let's move on to question 11. That is, Mark wrote his gospel after Peter's death in which country? Now, which country did Mark wrote his gospel after the death of Peter? Now we have option A, Egypt, option B, Syria, option C, Italy, option D, Israel. Now, which of these country did the gospeler Mark wrote his book after the death of Peter? Now, if you read through, it says, according to early church traditions, Mark wrote his gospel after the death of Peter in Italy, which is likely in Rome. You know that Rome is also in Italy, so the correct answer there has to be Italy. This question is also a direct question and requires a direct answer. So the direct question there is, Mark wrote his gospel after Peter's death in which country? And the direct answer there is the option B, which is Italy. Now let's move on to question 12. It says, the impediment to the spread of the gospel in Roman Empire was dash. What was the impediment? Now, what is impediment? Impediment can be referred to as obstruction or delay or obstacle that led to the spread of the gospel in Roman Empire. Now, the options there are option A, heretical movement, option B, Hebrew religion, option C, Greek language, options D, Roman peace. If you look at that question 11, no, sorry, question 9, it has Pax Romana. And if you look down at that question 12, it also has Roman peace. And you know that Pax Romana means Roman peace. So now, which of the impediments to the spread of the gospel in Roman Empire was the correct answer? And let's look at the options again. For option A, it has heretical movements. Option B, it has Hebrew religion. Option C, it has Greek language. And option D, it has Roman peace. Now, specifically, the association of the Christian message with Jewish law, which has to do with circumcision, restrictions, Sabbath. Now, to get a clearer details of this question, to get a clearer answer of this question, it says that the Hebrew religion, where the Gentiles were asked to abstain from certain practices. Now, the Gentiles who were not part of the Jewish religion were asked to abstain from certain practices. In order to answer this question, I'm trying to explain something in practical terms. Now, the Gentiles were asked to abstain from certain practices, such as food, sacrifice to idols, blood, strangled animals, and sexual immorality, of which the Gentiles were reluctant to embrace until the decision was revoked by the Jerusalem Council. If you read through Acts 15, you will see it there. So the answer to that question is the heretical movement. Now, the heretical movement is that movement in which the Gentiles were asked to abstain from certain practices, like I mentioned earlier. Now, let's move on to question 13. The problems of the early church were addressed in the following ways, except A, New Testament canon, B, authority of the bishops, C, Apostle Creed, and D, Hellenization. Now, we know what the New Testament canon is. This has to do with the canonization of the books in the New Testament. Now, that means books that are in the New Testament, like the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, all those books, they were canonized, so they were regarded as authoritative. Now, if we move down to Hellenization, what is Hellenization? What is Hellenization? Hellenization has to do with, hold on, let me think what Hellenization has to do with. Okay, Hellenization has to do with the spread of Greek culture and philosophy, especially after Alexander the Great. While it influenced the early church environment, it was not a method used by the early church to address its internal problems. Now, the early church did not use the Hellenization as a tool to address the problem of the church. Like I said, Hellenization refers to the spread of Greek culture and philosophy. The spread of Greek culture was not used in the early church. So the correct answer there has to be Hellenization. Apostle Creed was used here. Old New Testament canon was used. Authority of the bishop was used. Now let's move on to question 14. What's question 14? It says the name of the first missionary group to plant Christianity in Ghana is the dash. Now, which group was the first to plant Christianity in Ghana? Now, there are different groups that planted Christianity in West Africa. We have the ones that planted Christianity in Nigeria, have the one that planted Christianity in Liberia, have the one that planted Christianity in Sierra Leone. Now, we are focusing on the mission group that planted Christianity in Ghana. Now, if you look through the options, it has the Anglican Church as option A, Wesleyan Mission as option B, Catholic Church as option C, and Basil Mission as option D. Now, if you are reading through the planting of Christianity in West Africa, especially in Ghana, you see that the Basil Mission were the first to step their foot in Ghana, and they were the first to plant Christianity in Ghana. And this Basil mission was led by Reverend Andres Rees, a Danish missionary who was from the Basil mission. So the correct answer there is the Basil mission and not the Anglican Church or the Catholic Church. Now let's move on to question 14. Sorry, question 15. The early missionaries in Igbo land lost their lives due to what? Now, these European missionaries, they lost their lives in Igbo land due to what reason? We have option A as scorpion attack, option B as malaria attack, option C as epidemic, and option D as influenza. Now, if you look at these options, all of them have all negative impact or negative attack to the spread of Christianity in West Africa. Now, the influenza was also a problem for the missionaries. The epidemic was also a problem for the missionaries, and malaria was also a problem for missionaries, and also the scorpion attack was also a problem for the missionaries. But now we are looking at the Igbo land, the missionaries that lost their land in Igbo land. What was the main reason why they lost their life in Igbo land? The main reason why they lost their lives in Igbo land was due to the malaria attack. Because if you read through the planting of Christianity in Nigeria, you see that the earliest Protestant missionaries who ventured into Igbo land suffered very high mortality defects, not from conflict, but from tropical diseases. Tropical diseases in Africa has to do with malaria. If you look in Africa now, we are all immune to malaria, but the whites, the Europeans, they are not immune to malaria. So them coming to Africa, the malaria was seen as an attack to them. So now let's move on to question 16. It says the expression impact of Christianity in Ghana implies the expression impact of Christianity in Ghana implies. Now let's run through the options here. It says for option A, it has what non-Christian expected from Christians as option A, what Christians in Ghana did then as option B, general expectation from Christians in Ghana option C, and the influence of Christianity on the lives of people in Ghana. Now, if you look at the third option there, impacts, influence, they are correlated, they are similar in words, they are similar in meaning. So the correct answer there has to be the influence of Christianity on the lives of people in Ghana. Now let's move on to question 17. Question 17 says, Philip ministered to the Ethiopian eunuch at. Where did Philip minister to the Ethiopian eunuch? If you read through the book of Isaiah precisely, you'll see that the Ethiopian eunuch, after coming down from Egypt, that is Gaza, he was reading the book of Isaiah Isaiah 57, Isaiah 53, verse 7 and 8. And Philip met him on the way. And Philip asked the Ethiopian eunuch, do you understand what you are reading? And the Ethiopian eunuch's reply was that, how will I understand if there is no one to explain this for me? So he then asked Philip to board his chariot. And after Philip boarded his chariot, he explained that scripture he was reading, which was the book of Isaiah 53, verse 7 and 8. So from the options there, it has Gaza as the option it has Jerusalem, it has Rome, and it has Ethiopia. So it cannot be Ethiopia because he was an Ethiopian eunuch. That means he was coming from another place. Like he was the guardian of the queen's treasury. He was coming from Egypt to Egypt, or he was coming from Gaza. So the correct answer there has to be Gaza. Yeah. Now let's move on to question 18. Which of the following is not an example of AICS? AICs. Now, which of the following is not an example of AICs? Now, what is AICs? AICs stands for African Independent Churches or African Indigenous Churches. Now, which of the following is not an example of African Indigenous Churches? The following church or the following denomination is not an example of African independent churches. We have option A as Christ Apostolic Church, option B, the Apostolic Church, option C, the Apostolic Faith, and option D, the Apostolic Gospel. The Apostolic Gospel. Now, if you look at that Christ Apostolic Church, CAC, it was founded by a founder of the African Independence Churches, which is Josiah Oshiletu. Sorry, it was founded by one of the founding fathers of the African Independent Churches, which is Joseph Ayo Babalola. Now let's look at the Apostolic Church. The Apostolic Church, if you remove the Christ, there is seeming like it looks the same. Like for that option A that I said, Christ Apostolic Church, and option B, the Apostolic Church, the two of them looks the same. They sound the same also. Now let's look at the Apostolic Faith. The Apostolic Faith is also part of the African Independent Churches or the African Indigenous Churches. But if you take a look at the Apostolic Gospel is not related to the African Independent Churches because it does not mix its own gospel with African cultures or African traditions. But if you look at the Christ Apostolic Church, it mixes its own standpoint or its own missionary activity with African religion or culture. So the correct answer there has to be the Apostolic Gospel. The Apostolic Gospel is the correct answer because it's not an example of the African Independent Churches. Now let's move on to question 19. Question 19 is a direct question. So you just have to look at the year when Prince Henry the Navigator was born, which is March 4 of 1394. Sorry, March 4 of 1394. That was when Prince Henry the Navigator was born. Now let's move on to question 20. Question 20 says, an example of myth associated with Eucharistic doctrine in Christendom is dash. An example of myth associated with Eucharistic doctrine in Christendom is option A, we have the wedding at Canaan, option B, feeding of 4,000, option C, Cain and Abel, and option D, the Last Supper. Let's take a few minutes to look at that question. Okay, I said we should take a few minutes to look at that question. So we've run through the answer, and from the answer, you see that the Last Supper was a historical event recorded in the Gospel, and it was not a myth. The Last Supper was not a myth, but sorry, I said the Last Supper was not a myth. The Last Supper was a myth, but if you look at feeding of 4,000, it's in the Bible, so it has evidence. The wedding at Canaan, that was the first miracle Jesus performed. That is turning water into wine at the wedding of Canaan. And for the last option there, Cain and Abel, that one is not a myth because the book of Genesis stated that Cain and Abel were the sons of Adam and Eve. So the Last Supper was regarded as a myth because some biblical scholars do not believe in the evidence that the Last Supper was associated with Eucharistic doctrine in Christendom. Now let's move on to question 21. It says, the United Nations agency responsible for fighting against the use of illicit drug is dash. the United Nations agency. Now, the United Nations has different agencies. It has the WHO, it has UNESCO, it has UNICEF, it has World Bank also. It has the what's that thing called? World Justice, World Court. Yes, it has the World Court also. Now, if you look at the options, it has option A, UNICEF, option B, UNESCO, option C, UNDP, and option D, UNODC. Now, let's understand these terms. Let's start with the UNICEF. Now, what's the UNICEF? What does the UNICEF stand for? The UNICEF stands for the United Nations International Children Funds. The U the UNESCO there stands for the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. The the UNDP stands for the United Nations Development Program. And the last one there is the UNODC, which stands for the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. So the correct answer there has to do with the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, because the question there is the United Nations agency responsible for fighting against the use of illicit drugs. Now the UNODC has drugs on its abbreviation. So the correct answer is UNODC, which is the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. Now let's move on to question 22. What are the three main religions in Nigeria? Of course, this one is a direct question and requires a direct option, but let's read through the options here. It has option A, African traditional religion, Christianity, and Hinduism. Hinduism is not practiced in Nigeria, it's practiced outside Nigeria, like in India and Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan. And for option B, it has Christianity, Islam, and African traditional religion. Option C, it has Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Option D, it has Christianity, Taoism, and Buddhism. Now, the correct answer there has to do with Christianity, Islam, and African traditional religion. That's the correct answer there. Now, let's move on to question 23. Question 23 has to do with the theories of the society or the state. Now, the question there is, the conflict theory was propounded by Dash. Who propounded the conflict theory? The conflict theory was propounded by Karl Marx, although we have different theories of the state propounded by different theorists. Now, for example, we have the functionalism theory by Emily Durkheim, psychoanalytic theory by Sigmund Freud, and sociological theory by Max Weber. But we are looking at the conflict theory. This conflict theory was propounded by Karl Marx in State of Nature. Now let's move on to question 23. Question 24, sorry. The sacred symbol that inspires and sustains society in Durkheim's theory is known as, what is the sacred symbol that inspires and sustains the society in Durkheim's theory? Now we have the option as option A, collective art, option B, ritual, option C, primitive symbol, and option D, totem. Totem. The correct answer there is totem, because if you look at the theory of functionalism by Emily Durkheim, it's stated there. Now let's move on to question 25. It says, one of the following is not a religious response to social ills in the society. Was not the response to social ills? Now, what are social ills? These are problems in societies, societal problems or conflicts in society. Now, what are the options? The options there are detestation as option A, prayer, option B, advocacy, option C, and rehabilitation as option D. Now, what is the correct answer? If you look at those options, there's one odd answer there, and that's detestation. Now, what is detestation? Detestation refers to an extreme dislike or hatred, which is not a constructive religious response to social issues. But look at prayer. Prayer is a religious response to societal ills. Of course, it's a religious response. Advocacy is also a religious response to societal ills. And also rehabilitation is a religious response to societal ills. So the correct answer there is detestation, which is the odd one. Now let's move on to question 26. An inspirational theory of the Bible, which states that God guided the hands of scripture writers, is dash. Now we have biblical inspiration theory. There are theories that has to do with biblical inspiration. If you look through, you see that in the options they have different theories. We have option A, verbal plenary theory, option B, dictation theory, option C, content theory, option D, neo-orthodox theory. Now, what is dictation theory? Let's start with that one because that's the correct answer. Dictator, dictation theory states that God guided the hands of scripture writers. Now, that is the people that wrote the Bible were inspired by the Spirit of God, which is the Holy Spirit, to write down the Bible or to pen down the words of God in their own language, but God's Spirit guided them. Now we've gotten the answer because I've given the definition of the dictation theory. From the word itself, dictation, you will know that it has to do with writing down, penned down by writers. Now let's move on to question 27. Let's move on to question 27. What type of government did Solomon, the son of Bathsheba, operate? Now, what type of government? This question is likely linked to forms of government. And we have different forms of government. We have the monarchy, we have democracy, we have authoritative dictatorship, we have plutocracy, gerontocracy, autocracy. We have different forms of government. Now, but the question is, what type of government did Solomon, the son of Bathsheba, operate? So looking at the option there, we have monarchy, we have oligarchy, we have democracy, and we have theocracy. Now, what is oligarchy? Because oligarchy is also in the option. Oligarchy is a form of government by a few individuals who rule for their own selfish interests. And we also have democracy. Democracy is a form of government whereby the people choose their own representatives to represent them as leaders. Now, we also have theocracy. Theocracy is a form of government by religious leaders. Then we have monarchy. Monarchy is a form of government whereby a king or a queen rules and pass down this leadership to an inherited heir or a hereditary heir. So the form of government in which Solomon, the son of Bathsheba, operated was a monarchy system because it has to do with a rule by a king or a queen. Now let's move on to question 28. Question 28 says, the thematic preoccupation of Prophet Isaiah's message is. Now, this question, if you are looking at the themes of the prophets, there are different themes for each prophet. For Isaiah, he has holiness. For Jeremiah, it has righteousness and justice. For Ezekiel, he has doom. For Amos, he has justice. For Hosea, he has love. So now the thematic preoccupation of Prophet Isaiah's message is holiness. Isaiah was a prophet that proclaimed holiness after receiving his vision from God during the death of King Uzziah. Now let's move on to question 29. Question 29 says, the Ark of the Covenant was captured during the battle between the Israelites and the Tash. Now, the options here are Jebusites, option A, Philistines, option B, Amalekites, option C, Amorites, option D. Now, the correct answer there is the Philistines. Now, why is it the Philistines? If you are looking at the story of how Eli died and how Samuel became the high priest, you understand that during the battle between the Israelites and the Philistines, the Ark of God was captured and was taken to Ebenezer. It was taken by the Philistines to their own land. And as a result, when Eli heard the news that the Ark of God was captured, he fell down and broke his neck. This resulted to his death. And also the two sons of Eli was also killed in the battle. And this made Samuel to ultimately become the high priest of the Israelites at that time. So now let's move on to question 30. I've answered question 29 as the Philistines. Now let's move on to question 30. It says, the instruction, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, was given to whom? This question is not that complex. It's a statement that God made. It says, God instructed someone to go away from his country and his kindred and his father's house to a land that he will show him, an unknown land. So the option there are, who did God give this instruction? The option there is Jacob as option A, Abraham option B, Amos option C, and Isaac option D. Sorry, I pronounced that as Abraham instead of Abraham. So which of these did God instruct to go from his country and his kindred and his father's house to the land he will show him? The correct answer there is Abraham, because God instructed Abraham to go away from his land, from his father's land, from his kindred to the land that he was going to show him. And Abraham obeyed this commandment, and as a result, he was blessed with, as the father of the faithful, he was given the title as father of the faithful, and he was blessed with lots of children and also called the father of all nations. Now let's move on to question 31. The acronym JEDP stands for. What does that acronym JEDP stands for? Now, if you look at this question, you see that it's related to the documentary hypothesis of the Pentateuch that was gotten from different sources by different scholars. Now, the J in that JEDP stands for the Jehovah or Yahweh source. The E there stands for the Elohim. The D stands for the Deuteronomist, gotten from during the time of King Josiah, and the P there stands for the priestly code. So therefore, the JEDP stands for the Yahweh, Elohim, Deuteronomist, and priestly code. Now let's move on to question 32. Question 32 says, the books referred to as apocrypha are seen in the following, except the books referred to as apocrypha are seen in the following, except. Now, what are the options? Option A, Roman Catholic canon. Option B, Alexandria canon. Option C, Protestant canon. And option D, Eastern Orthodox canon. Now, which book is referred to as the Apocrypha and which book is not referred to as the Apocrypha? Now, what is the Apocrypha? The Apocrypha books are books or texts that are not canonical or that was not canonized or also considered authoritative in religious traditions. That means if you look at the Old Testament and the New Testament, there are some books that were not included. These books are known as the Apocrypha book. So now let's look at the option. The option there, I've mentioned the options there before. So the correct answer there has to be the Protestant canon. The Protestant canon is the correct answer there. Because if you look at the Alexandria canon, it was canonized. The Eastern Orthodox canon, which was also canonized. The Roman Catholic canon, which is the Bible that the Catholics normally use, was also canonized. Now let's move on to question 33. Who suggested in 1796 that oral tradition lay at the base of the synoptic material? Who was the person that suggested the oral tradition lay at the base of the synoptic material? We have different scholars there, different names, sorry. I have different names there. For option A, we have J.G. von Herder. Option B, we have J.J. Griesbach. This J.J. Griesbach is related to the documentary hypothesis, the four documentary hypothesis of the gospel. Then we also have the J. Gesela and St. Augustine of Hippo. The St. Augustine of Hippo is related to the gospel during the time of Alexandria in Egypt. Now, which of the following persons suggested the oral tradition lay at the base of the synoptic material? I've eliminated two names there, which is J.J. Griesbach and St. Augustine of Hippo. Of course, now let's look at the correct answer there. The correct answer there has to be J.J. Gisela. Now, why is it J.J. Gisela? Please hold on a bit. Hold on a bit. Okay, as I was saying, the J.J. Gisela is the correct answer because he was one that introduced the oral tradition lay at the base of the synoptic material in 1796. Now let's move on to question 34. Question 34 says, among the people listed below, who took part in the Niger expedition? who took part in the Niger expedition. We have 3 Niger expeditions that happened. We have the Niger expedition that happened in 1841. We have the Niger expedition that happened in 1854, and we have thirdly the Niger expedition that happened in 1857. So now, among the people listed below who took part in the Niger expedition, we have the options there as William de Graft, Mungo Park, option B, Hope Waddell, option C, and James Frederick Keon as option D. Now, the people that followed in the Niger expedition include William de Graft, include other biblical scholars. So William de Graft there is the sorry, James Frederick Keon is the correct answer. Is the correct answer. So now let's move on to question 35. It says the basic theological position of Matthew is dash. What is Matthew's theological position? What is his viewpoint or what is his standpoint? We have option A as Jesus' messianic secret, option B as Jewish messianic hope of Jesus Christ, option C repentance to heaven, and option D through salvation through the word of God. Now, which of these is the basic theological position of Matthew? Now, Matthew's own theological position was that the Jewish messianic hope of Jesus Christ, which is the second coming of Jesus Christ, was going to be fulfilled. Now, Matthew talked about the second coming of Jesus Christ. So the correct answer there has to be the Jewish messianic hope. Now, the messianic hope is talking about the second coming of Jesus Christ, of course. So the rest of the options there is not related to the theological positions of Matthew. Now let's move on to question 36. Question 36. I need water. Let me get water. Question 36. For question 36, it says, which of the Gospels is Messiah oriented in terms of purpose? Which of the Gospels is Messiah oriented in terms of purpose? We have options there. Option A, we have Matthew. Option B, Mark. Option C, Luke. We have option D, John. Now, these are the Gospel. Now, but which one is the Messiah oriented in terms of purpose? Now, the answer there is Matthew. Now, why is it Matthew? Matthew's primary goal is to present Jesus as the promised Messiah. So if you look at this statement that I just made, that Matthew's primary goal is to present Jesus as the promised Messiah. Sorry, hold on. Matthew's primary goal is to present Jesus as the promised Messiah or the Christ and King of the Jews, fulfilling the Old Testament prophecies. Matthew emphasized Jesus' Davidic lineage, his legal rights. That means he emphasized how Jesus was linked to the lineage of David, who was the king at that time, king of Judah at that time. He emphasized Jesus' legal rights to the throne and also role in the fulfillment of the messianic expectation. So Matthew's goal or his Messiah oriented in terms of purpose was given to Matthew because he explained that in his own biblical passage or gospel. Now let's move on to question 37. Question 37 says, Solomon built the first temple at Jerusalem on Mount. This question is also a direct question. It says, Solomon built the first temple at Jerusalem on Mount. Why did Solomon build the temple, his first temple, when he became king? The options there are Mount Horeb, that one is related to Moses. We also have Mount Sinai, which is related to Moses. Gezrim, I don't know who that one is related to. And also Moriah. Moriah is related to Solomon because that's where he built his first temple. Now let's move on to question 38. Question 38 says the hypothesis against the Martian priority. The hypothesis against the Martian priority is what is the Martian priority? The Martian priority is the standpoint that the book of Matthew was the first to be written, and that means other gospels copied from the book of Matthew. But if you're looking at the Markan priority, it says that the book of Mark was the first to be written. Therefore, the other gospels copied from the book of Mark. But now we are looking at the Martian priority. And the question is, the hypothesis against Martian priority is the dash. The options there are testimonies of early church fathers. Option A, Neo-Grisbackian theory, Neo-Grisback theory, Neo-Grisback theory of two gospel hypotheses. Option B, primitive gospel hypothesis. Option C, and two documentary theory. The two documentary theories also related to that Neo-Grisbackian theory of two gospel hypothesis. So the correct answer there has to be the Neo-Grisbackian hypothesis. Now, why is it the Neo-Grisbackian hypothesis? The Neo-Grisbackian hypothesis, also called the two gospel hypothesis, is indeed a major alternative to the Martian priority, and it supports the Martian priority. It's purpose that Matthew was the first to be written, and Luke used Matthew, and then Mark used both Matthew and Luke to write his gospel. Now, this Martian priority is also called the two gospel hypothesis, if you are looking at the documentary hypothesis of the gospel. Now, the documentary hypothesis of the gospel is also different from the documentary hypothesis of the Pentateuch, because the documentary hypothesis of the Pentateuch is looking at the first 5 books of the Pentateuch, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Deuteronomy. Now, but when looking at the documentary hypothesis of the gospel, we are looking at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John also. No, sorry, John is not involved. We are just looking at Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Now let's move on to question 39. Stuff. In what year did the earliest Portuguese missionary get to Benin Kingdom? It's a direct question. They are just asking in what year did Portuguese, the European country Portuguese, entered Benin. Now, the Portuguese were the first set of people to enter West Africa. But in what year did they enter Benin? They entered Benin in 1485 during the reign of Oba Ozuatwa in 1481 to 1504 century. And this was a diplomatic and trade mission led by the Portuguese explorers, and it opened the door for future relations. The Portuguese, like this Portuguese, however, arrived later around the 15th century during the reign of Oba Esegie Ozolua's son. So in short, 1485 was the first Portuguese contact, while 1515 was the arrival of the missionaries in Benin. So the correct answer there has 1485 as the option, but does not have 1515, which was the arrival of the missionaries. So we are definitely picking that 1485 as the correct answer. Now let's move on to question 40. The eternal sacred order of the cherubim and seraphim was founded by whom? Who founded the eternal order of the cherubim and seraphim? The eternal sacred order of the cherubim and seraphim. Now the options there are Samuel Oshofa, nope. Joseph Ayo Babaola, nope. Moses Orimolade, that's correct, and Josiah Oshiletu. So the correct answer there is Moses Orimolade. Why is it Moses Orimolade? It was Moses Orimolade because he founded the internal order of the internal sacred order of cherubim and seraphim around 1925 in Nigeria, and he was a Christian mystic and spiritual leader from Ikare in present-day Odo State. Now, his movement began as a revival within Christianity, emphasizing holiness, vision, prophecy, healing, and the power of prayer, which was basically linked to the eternal sacred order of the cherubim and seraphim. Because if you look at them today, what Moses Orimolade practiced at during his time in 1925. That is what the Eternal Sacred Order of the Cherubim and Seraphim are practicing today. Now let's move on to question 41. It says, the team of evangelists led by Samuel Ajayi Crowther that established the Niger mission was the team of evangelists led by Samuel Ajayi Crowther. Now, Samuel Ajayi Crowther was the first bishop of Nigeria, the first archbishop of Nigeria. So the team of evangelists led by him that established the Niger mission was, what was the name? Was it the Igbo evangelists? Was it the Yoruba evangelists? Was it the Creole evangelists? Or was it the native evangelists? Now, the Creole evangelist is linked to Sierra Leone. The Yoruba evangelist is linked to Nigeria also, and the Igbo evangelist is also linked to Nigeria. Now, if you look at that native, it has to do with combination of both the Igbo and the Yoruba. So the correct answer there has to do with the native evangelists. Now, let's move on to question 42. It says, which part of the African continent witnessed the first Christian evangelization? Now, which part of Africa witnessed the first Christian evangelization? Which part of Africa? We have different parts of Africa. We have North Africa, we have North East Africa, we have West Africa, we have South Africa. But which part of Africa experienced the first Christian evangelization? So the correct answer there is North Africa. Why is it North Africa? It's North Africa because in North Africa, Egypt is located in North Africa, and the first Christian evangelization contact in Africa was done in Egypt around the time that Christianity was introduced to Alexandria, Egypt by around during the time of Mark the evangelist, and it was traditionally believed to have brought the gospel there around 42 to 62 AD, leading to the establishment of the Coptic Orthodox Church, one of the oldest Christian communities in the world. Now let's move on to question 43. I've answered that question 42 as North Africa because it's related to Egypt, which is the first Christian contact in Africa. Now let's move on to question 43. It says, Freetown was originally known as. What was Freetown originally known as? The options there are option A, Freedom Town, option B, Granville Town, option C, Joloram Town, and option D, Cape Town. So Freetown was originally known as Granville Town, which is option B there. Now, how is it known as Granville Town? If you look at Freetown, which is the capital of Sierra Leone, it was originally known as Granville Town when it was first established in 1787 century, because it was founded by the British as a settlement for freed African American, West Indies, and African slaves, many of whom had fought for the British during the American Revolution War and were later resettled from Nova Scotia and other places. And later in 1792, when more freed slaves, especially from that Nova Scotia, arrived for the settlement that was later renamed Freetown. So therefore, before it was named Freetown, it was given the name Granville Town. Now let's move on to question 44. It says, in what name did the earliest Portuguese missionaries baptize the Olu of Warri's son? In what name? Now, the Olu, let me just tell you a brief story before we check the options for the answer. Now, the Olu of Warri's descent, the Olu of Warri, that means the Olu Warri's son, which is Prince Ayomasan, was baptized by the Portuguese missionaries around the year 1600, and his baptismal name was Domingos, and he had been sent to Portugal for education and religious training. His father, the reigning Olu of Warri at the time, was Olu Alorongboye, who had himself adopted the Christian name Sebastian after converting to Christianity. He was likely renamed in honor of the Portuguese king Sebastian. So now, to summarize all this, Olu Ale Rongboye, also known as Sebastian, reigned from 1597 to 1625. Then his son, Prince Ayomasan, who was baptized and given the baptismal name Domingos around 1600 in Portugal. So now let's look at the question again. It says, in what name did the earliest Portuguese missionary baptize the Olu of Warison? From what I've said, say that the Olu of Warison was baptized in the name Sebastian. Was baptized in the name Sebastian, in the name of the then Portuguese king, before the name was given to the Olu himself. Now let's move on to question 45 quickly. It says, the leading missionary society in Sierra Leone was, which of the following was the leading missionary society? Yeah, reading through the planting of Christianity in West Africa, Sierra Leone precisely, you'll see that the leading missionary society there was CMS, which was the Church Missionary Society. So the Church Missionary Society was the leading missionary society, and not the Bremen Mission or the Wesleyan Methodist Society or the Roman Catholic Mission. Now let's move on to question 46. Question 46 says, in Nigeria, homosexuality is prohibited and penalized by up to dash. How many years is the penalty for homosexuality? Now, if you look at Nigerian Constitution, we have various punishments or various penalties for different crimes. For example, Section 316 of the Nigerian Constitution has to do with murder, and the punishment for murder could be life imprisonment or hanging or death by firing squad. But now we are looking at homosexuality, and in the option we have 12 years imprisonment, no; 10 years imprisonment, no; 14 years imprisonment is correct, and 8 years imprisonment is not correct. So the correct answer there is 14 years imprisonment, based on the Nigerian Constitution. Now let's look at question 47. It says, religion can enhance peace in the society through all except. What can religion enhance except? The options there are interreligious advocacy, yes. Religion can enhance peace using that as a tool. Tolerance, yes, religion can use that as a tool. Reprisal attack, no, religion cannot use that. And interreligious attack dialogue, religion can use that. So now if you look at the options, there's one odd one there, which is reprisal attack. That means what somebody do you. If you blow somebody's eye, you can also the person can also blow your eye. That's what this reprisal attack is trying to say. Now let's move on to question 48. It says, one of these is not an ethical value in religion. Which of these is not an ethical value of religion? Now let's look at the options. It has option A as sanctity of human life, option B, honesty, option C, dignity of labor, and option D, exploitation. Now, which of these is not an ethical value in religion? Of course, honesty is an ethical value of religion, dignity of labor is an ethical value of religion, and sanctity of human life is an ethical value of religion. But exploitation is not an ethical value of religion, just as what the colonial masters did during the time of colonialism in Nigeria. You can see that exploitation is a bad or negative thing. Now let's move on to question 49, which is second to the last. The question there says, the human personality consists of three different elements: the id, the ego, and the superego, according to who? Now, if you're looking at the personality, this theory is related to the psychoanalytic theory, which is related to Sigmund Freud. Now let's look at the option whether Sigmund Freud's name is there. The option has option A, Emil Durkheim, option B, Max Weber, option C, Karl Marx, and option D, Sigmund Freud. So Sigmund Freud there is the correct answer because it's related to the personality, the different personality or different elements of human personality, which is related to the psychoanalytic theory, is related to Sigmund Freud. Now let's move on to question 50, which is the last question for today. It says, the positive function of religion to society includes the following except. What is the positive function of religion, or what is the positive impact of religion to society? Now let's look at the option. Social conflicts, maintenance of law, offering of solace, answers, naughty questions. Okay, in the question, it has except. Now, the positive functions of religion to society includes all of the following, except one. Now, if you look at it, religion promotes maintenance of law and order. Yes, it offers solace and it answers naughty or technical questions relating to religion or somebody's belief, but it does not promote social conflict or it does not promote class conflict in the society. So, social conflict is the correct answer. I've answered all the I've answered and explained all the questions for CRS 2024. I'd like to see you guys next time. Thank you.